Okay. And after you posted the Bible verse, if I understand correctly, you were charged under Finland's war crimes and crimes against humanity law.
Yes, we have in that section, we have a law about agitation against minorities.
Wow. Well, as a pastor for 37 years now myself, to think of someone that can be criminally charged for posting a Bible verse in the EU and NATO country worries me deeply. And as you've already heard from this panel today, God bless you. God bless you for coming here today to share your story. And my prayer is that it causes people to wake up to the threats that we are facing from those who seek to undermine our God-given right to free expression. We even saw just in a piece of the video clip that Mr. Biggs shared of when the church was stormed right there in Minneapolis and leaving families scattering and all kinds of threats that were felt that day and still dealing with that even now. I also want to state to you, Mr. Price, one of the things that brings Western countries together is our shared values. And in my view, the right to freedom of speech is one of these values. While I understand our European counterparts have not always been as gung-ho, perhaps, about free speech as us in the United States, I never thought in 2026 we would be seeing people jailed for posting Bible verses or even crass jokes. Thankfully, high-profile Americans are calling out our friends for this madness. In February of 2025, Vice President Vance gave a high-profile speech at the Munich Security Conference in which he urged Europeans to turn away from censorship and re-embrace fundamental free speech principles. What effect, Mr. Price, do you think that Vice President's words had, and what signal did they send to Europe?
I think they were very impactful because the administration was shining a light on the nature of the problem. This is going to get worse. We have people being arrested for praying silently in the UK. We have people being prosecuted for posting Bible verses, for making jokes. The European Union is attempting now to export that through the Digital Services Act and force it on Americans, these European laws. And they're not going to back down easily because, as you can see with the approach they've taken to X, when a company commits itself to free speech, they have to stop that because of, as I say, I think they see it as an existential threat. And I'm ashamed to say, as an Irishman, my own country is playing a central role in this because most of these large US platforms are headquartered in Dublin. And it's the Irish regulator that's cooperating closely with the European Commission enforcing this. And as I said on the last occasion, I really hope that the United States, using its diplomatic channels, brings this home to the Irish government, that forcing American companies to police American speech and generally to police anyone's speech is wrong, and that if they escalate in this direction, it's going to cause significant additional problems.
Well, and I applaud our Vice President for his speech, and I hope we can continue to remind our friends and allies of the value of free speech and expression. Unfortunately, we've heard in today's hearing, we have a long way to go. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back to you the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. We will
Mr. Chair, I have a UC.
The gentlelady from Vermont is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I ask you now to consent to introduce for the record a letter from Reverend Jared Weber Johnson of St. John's, the Evangelist Episcopal Church in St. Paul, Minnesota, which calls what is happening in Minnesota unlawful and unconstitutional, as well as a blasphemy against God.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman,
the gentlelady from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an article from The Hill entitled, "Poll 62% think ICE efforts go too far." That includes 92% of Democrats, 65% of independents, and even 30% of Republicans, a 10-point shift in Republicans' attitudes to ICE.
Without objection. Mr. Raskin.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to enter the record this Minnesota Star Tribune article from February 2nd titled, "Another Wave of Departures in Minnesota's U.S. Attorney's Office as 14 additional attorneys left this year."
Without objection. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I join my Democratic colleagues in denouncing this sham hearing, which is an effort to distract from the brutal assault on First Amendment rights by the Trump administration and its lackeys in Congress. The greatest threat to free speech and dissent is the Republican Party today. We're in the midst of an authoritarian crackdown on the First Amendment, led by ICE and CBP agents who are murdering American citizens in peaceful protest while the president threatens to sue a comedian over a joke. That ain't funny. These attacks have escalated, but they're not new. Republicans have gutted funding for colleges and universities while trying to dictate the academic content and make it more right-wing. They've weaponized the immigrant system against Mahmoud Khalil, Rumeus Ostruk, and others who dare to speak for Palestinian rights. They've literally banned the federal government from using words and phrases they're terrified of, like women, oh my God, diverse, holy cow, affordable housing, who would ponder that? Clean water, you want to drink dirty? And equality, think of that. I thought all persons were created equal. And these attacks have not spared the Chicagoland region. Republicans have attacked Chicago and Illinois for our welcoming policies and illegally tried to withhold funding on decisions, based on decisions by local officials. They funded mass death squads that killed, in my district, Silverio Villegas Gonzalez, shot Marimar Martinez, who was here in the US Senate yesterday, and spread violence and terror in our streets. And as our neighbors exercise their First Amendment rights to peacefully protest the severe abuses at the Broadview facility, they were met with brutal repression by the federal government. A pastor was shot in the head with pepper balls right adjacent to my district. Journalists were tear gassed, and 6 protesters, including local elected officials, were arrested on vague conspiracy charges without substantial evidence. These charges and the actions of federal agents overall constitute a fascist attack on democracy. But we're not backing down. We continue to nonviolently protest, and the courts have struck down the attacks on welcoming policies and the extreme use of force against protesters and journalists at Broadview. Mr. Mayo, thank you for being here today and for the work that you've done keeping Minnesotans safe. I deeply appreciated your testimony at the field hearing that many of us attended in Minneapolis a couple of weeks ago. Can you speak to how the administration's occupation in our neighborhoods, in our cities, and our basic freedoms has escalated over the past year from Los Angeles to Chicago to the Twin Cities?
Yes, I think that you can look at what is happening in Minnesota as part of a broader pattern of abuse that has been, and brutality that has been documented in court after court across the country. And that includes the targeting of protesters and observers, and also the targeting of immigrants, and the due process rights that are being violated in the process of arrests and of apprehending immigrants. And that's a really important piece of this conversation here, is the racial profiling and the warrantless arrests that are happening on the streets of Minnesota right now.
And Mr. Mayo, can you talk about what you take away from the things that have mobilized people in Minneapolis like we haven't seen anywhere else in the country? What's at the heart of it?
What I can say is that the people of Minnesota have been disrupted, are shocked, are in a state of grief, and they are opposing what they're seeing as unlawful, unconstitutional, un-American activity on their streets. And this goes across party lines, across employment. You are seeing it with law enforcement. You are seeing it with elected leaders. Again, this is not normal law enforcement. This is not normal what is happening in Minnesota, and it should alarm everybody.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's worth noting, just for the people watching this hearing, that what's happening in Minnesota appears to be fairly unique to Minnesota. Local leftist law enforcement have abrogated their responsibilities to maintain order, and rather they are encouraging attack on federal law enforcement. It's not happening in my state. It's not happening in South Carolina, Texas, Florida, even California. So what's happening in Minnesota is a unique circumstance that is aggravated by the left and the left only. And my colleague who preceded me is a suitable spokesman and an able spokesman for the Democratic Party. It's worth noting that his home state, while illegals are welcomed in droves to Illinois, lured there